Today we have the incredible privilege to hear from Mark Russell. Mark has had a career in journalism with stops at the Wall Street Journal, the Plain Dealer, the Boston Globe, and Orlando Sentinel before coming here to Memphis, Tennessee, and is now the executive editor of the Commercial Appeal. Mark also served 4 years as a Pulitzer Prize juror, including serving on the prestigious Public Service panel. Mark is no stranger to change and cultivating resiliency, and brings with him a wealth of experience and a wealth of wisdom. In this episode, Mark shares his journey from Missouri to Cleveland to Pittsburgh to Cleveland to Boston to Cleveland to Orlando and then to Memphis, Tennessee. Embracing change, remaining resilient, and cultivating intentionality are only a few of the key lessons he has learned along the way. So let's get to it and meet Mark Russell in the green chair. Mark Russell.
How are you?
Hey, thank you so much for being here with us in the green chair.
Glad to be here. Finally in the green chair. I'm happy to be here.
I am so excited to have you here with us. So I would love for us to get to know you. You are a Memphis transplant, correct?
I am, yes.
Okay, where are you from?
I'm from St. Louis originally.
Okay.
Born and raised. Went to the University of Missouri, but I've lived all over, really. I've been in Boston, Cleveland, and of course Orlando before coming here.
Yeah.
About 8 years ago I came here.
Yeah, and so you're at the Commercial Appeal.
Yes.
Okay, I would love for you just to walk us through. You have such a fascinating story. When you and I were sitting down talking about this, I could not wait to get you in this green chair because I have loved the lessons you've learned along the way. But let's just start with, you're Missouri. You said you went to Mizzou.
Missouri grad.
Assuming journalism major.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Journalism grad, and proud journalism grad, actually. I'm still on the Journalism School Board, have been on the board for more than 20 years. So let me start with the most recent move. I moved to Memphis about 8 years ago as managing editor and became editor about 3.5, 4 years ago. So I'm in that role currently, executive editor for the Commercial Appeal. And before the CA, I was in Orlando at the Orlando Sentinel, which is a similar kind of news organization, digital print. And I was editor there for 3 years. And before that was managing editor for about 6 years, so 9 years total in Orlando. And before Orlando, I was in a succession of places.
Yes.
Cleveland, Boston, back to Cleveland.
Okay.
So I couldn't keep a job or I wanted to be in Cleveland a lot. People can look at it one or two different ways, but I've been in several different markets, but I really love being in Memphis. It's a city that reminds me a lot of my native St. Louis, only a little smaller, and it's a great news town. As people I think already know that. Yeah. And I love being there because the people are so hospitable and so friendly.
Yeah. Okay, so we were talking, and I loved I love getting perspectives from Memphis transplants. Yeah. You said a few things you've learned since Memphis. Funny things about Memphis. One of them was breakfast.
Yeah, so I'll tell you one funny story about Memphis, and that is when I first got here, my wife and my daughter remained in Orlando. Our son is there too, by the way. He stayed in Orlando. My wife and daughter moved here with me, but they stayed there for about 6 months when I was here alone, living downtown and meeting lots of people and trying to understand the city. I was going to be the managing editor of a newspaper and didn't have any friends, didn't know much about the city at all, so I had a lot of work to do to get to know the city. And I quickly discovered that when people say let's meet for coffee, they really mean let's meet for breakfast. It's not coffee. And so first few times I would have a full breakfast and show up and I'd say, what we having breakfast or coffee? It was always breakfast. It was never just coffee. That's one thing I learned. The other thing I learned about Memphis that's a little bit like St. Louis is that people are very interested in where you're from. And one way they figure that out when they meet you is to say, what church are you a member of? And I was a member of no church when I first arrived. I'll tell you about how I got to Hope shortly. And they also ask you, what high school did you go to? And of course, I went to high school in St. Louis, not in Memphis. But it's a way of figuring out who you are, where you're from. All those kind of things separate people and unite them too. Yeah. It tells you a little bit about where you're from and gives you some sense of some commonalities, if you will.
Yeah, that's really funny. My husband is born and raised Memphis. And that is exactly the question he asks everybody he meets is what high school you go to, and that's you're dead on.
Well, in St. Louis, that question is always where'd you go to high school. It's never what church did you go to. For me, that's either a Memphis thing or a South thing. I've never experienced that before until I got here.
That's neat.
It's kind of fun.
And then I love that you said, you told me the story about people in Memphis, which I think is so true as well. They love showing off their city.
Oh, yeah.
You had that experience with a lawyer,
absolutely.
right?
With a lawyer. It was really funny and kind of, in many ways, instructive about the city of Memphis. I've just been here a few months maybe, and there's a law firm that we work with at the CA. Adams and Reese is the name of the firm, and the guy's name is Lucian Pera. He's a kind of a famous lawyer in town and throughout the state. And he wanted to meet with me, one of his partners, and he wanted to have lunch. I said, great, I'm looking to do this all the time, so we end up meeting. But instead of me meeting him at the restaurant, he wants to pick me up. And his office, my office is downtown at the time. His office is out in East Memphis, pretty far out in East Memphis, near 240. I said, well, I'll do that, but I'd rather just meet you. No, I want to pick you up. I want to do this the right way. So he literally drives downtown from East Memphis, picks me up, and then drives me back out to Cooper Young to go to Central Barbecue.
Yes.
2 reasons. One is he wanted to show me this hospitality because I'm the guest or the new arrival. He's the longtime Memphis resident. He wanted to show me his favorite restaurant, and on the way, he had me trapped for both the trip there and the trip back, literally trapped in his car. Tell me about his Memphis, his version of Memphis, what he likes about the place, what he thinks should be done about the place. Everybody has an opinion about what they like, what they don't like. And it was a real, for me, introduction to Memphians, a certain kind of Memphian that really is proud of the city, wants to show it off. And I just learned you have to go along for the ride. Just go along for the ride. Don't complain. Don't try and meet them. Just let them pick you up and take you out places.
That's really neat.
And you only knew once, so this wore off after about 6 months. No one was picking me up after 6 months. No one.
Okay, so why journalism? How did you get there?
Sure. I've been in journalism my entire career, my entire professional career, and I'm a native of St. Louis, as I mentioned earlier. And my initial instinct as a high school junior, senior was to go into either math or become a professional athlete, maybe a football player. I had the skills for neither field. And it was my mother who is still very much one of my mentors and still is retired, of course, but now lives in St. Louis, who at the time, this has probably been up in my junior year of high school, said, I want you to meet a journalist. And I didn't know much about journalism at the time. I was a kid, looking to play baseball and football and do the thing kids do. I want you to meet this journalist named George Curry, who at the time was at the Post-Dispatch in St. Louis. Spend a day with him. Maybe it's a field you might want to get into. And she was right. I spent a day with George Curry, and we traveled throughout the city, hit the library. I love books. I love talking to people, as you can probably tell in this interview. And I fell in love with the field right then and there when I was meeting George Curry. And he ended up being a kind of a career-long mentor until he died about a couple years ago. Wow. And actually encouraged me to go to the University of Missouri. Because again, I was still harboring some thoughts of being a football player and wanted to go to Northeast Missouri State, which is a little further away from my home in St. Louis. And it was George Curry who said to me, wait a minute, you want to be a journalist, and you're bypassing the school that's closer to you and has the #1 journalism program in the nation. That makes absolutely no sense. And of course, as I tell the story, I was literally, when I had that conversation, on the campus in Kirksville, Missouri, at Northeast Missouri State, visiting the campus, had that conversation. Ended up buying a bus ticket on Greyhound, the dog, to go from Kirksville to Columbia and spend a day at Missouri, and never turned back after I saw the campus. He was right; it was the place for me. The campus was beautiful, great journalism school, and I made the decision right there with my parents. I'm going to go here and not to Kirksville.
Wow. That's really neat, and you've been doing journalism ever since.
Ever since 37 years now.
Wow, that's really exciting. Okay, so tell us a little bit about Commercial Appeal. You've been there how long now?
I've been there 8 years.
Okay.
Just about 8 years.
Okay.
And been again editor for about 4 years now, and it is a great place to work. And the Commercial Appeal, I tell people, is a well-known institution, 180 years old. It's been around a long time, has great permanence, but it also is very much in transformation. With everyone else in the media field, everything now is based on digital platform, and that's the direction we're going. We have a staff that's much younger than it was when I first got there. When I first got to the CA, I dare say at 51 years old, I was probably middle of the pack. I wasn't the youngest. I certainly was nowhere near the oldest staffer. And now I'm clearly in the older quadrant of the staff at 58 now. Wow. And most of our staffers are in their mid to late 20s. And that's a great thing for our journalism. They see things with fresh eyes. It's a great thing for the diversity of our newsroom. It's a far more diverse newsroom than it was when I first got there. And I just love working there because we're writing the first rough draft of history, yes, but we're also adding context to what's happening today. And there's a lot happening today, as we all know, with coronavirus, with the national reckoning on race, and just the regular sometimes unusual, sometimes crazy, and always compelling stories in Memphis.
And you know, you said something to me when we were talking that has really just stuck with me, is you talked about highlighting the resiliency of the community. I thought that was really powerful.
Yeah, it's an important thing for our newsroom, not just me, but for everyone in our newsroom, is that we live and work in this community, and we want to show the side of this community that's able to bounce back from challenges, that's able to overcome challenges, and we want to show that through our coverage, the resilience of this community, whether it's about education issues, the approach to attacking poverty, the approach to dealing with affordable housing. You know, how people come together in this community is, to me, a really big, important part of what we do, because we're trying to affirm why people live here. It's a great place to live and work, and our coverage needs to reflect some of that.
Yeah, and you know, you and I were just talking a second ago about the transition from print to digital. I mean, you have got to seen some pretty incredible things throughout your career.
I can tell you some stories about that. I mean, and I really regret one thing, because people look at the movies and say, have you ever had a chance to say, stop the presses? And I've never had a chance to do that. And of course, now you probably never will, because more than likely you're saying, let's stop the digital presses. I mean, it's no longer a business that's based solely on the printing of a newspaper, although we still do that every single day. But we also update the news every single hour, sometimes every few minutes, as stories evolve and change throughout the day. And I think that's a good thing in terms of readership. You can have access to more content, video and photos, an archive of information that back in the day you would have had no way of figuring out how to find a story from 2 years ago.
Wow.
And now you set your fingertips. You go to Google, do a Google search, you get all you want right on your fingertips. Go to ca.com, everything's right in front of you. And frankly, and I'll do one little plug here for getting a digital subscription to the CA.
I was going to ask about that.
It's one of the best deals around. I mean, it's not very expensive compared to what you get. I mean, literally, you're paying, I think the regular rate is about $9 a month, but there's so many great deals out there at commercialappeal.com. You can pay far less than that as a teaser rate and a monthly rate. And you literally unlock all the content you want, unlimited amount of content, for a fraction of the cost you might pay if you got a print subscription. Now, we still love our print subscribers. We still want them to hang on and stay. But we know the direction the business is going, and that's digital subscribers. Yeah,
that's what I was going to ask. So you're pushing people now more towards the digital subscription types?
I would say we are encouraging people, if they're looking to subscribe and they're having thoughts about and doubts about paying a lot of money for a print subscription, they're not used to print, try digital first. Because again, it's a far easier way to get your content. It's much less expensive. And if you want, there's a nice hybrid model where you can go digital 6 days a week and get the printed edition on Sunday.
Neat. Okay.
Now the truth is you get digital every day of the week, because you don't turn off digital on Sunday. But you get the print edition so you can have that lean back experience on Sunday with your coffee or your cornflakes and read the paper. But every other day of the week you get your phone at the ready when you wake up, when you go to bed, when you're at the stoplight in your car. Some people still do that, and you can catch up on the news.
That's really neat. Okay, so I would love to ask you, I mean, I'm sure this is a question you get all the time, but I mean, especially this past year, news and faith. I mean, how do you navigate news and faith? I mean,
so
I would love
that's a good question, actually, and I like to tell folks that, well, two things. One, at the CA we have a reporter who covers faith issues, Catherine Burgess. She's been doing it for a couple of years now, and she's very good at it, and she knows many of the ministers around town and writes about a lot of faith issues, which have become a big deal, especially with the pandemic, if churches like Hope have tried to have a hybrid model, or in some cases have gone all virtual, and how have they done that and how have they managed to navigate that situation. But I think it's also comes into play for me as well, because being a member of Hope, and I'm happy to be a member here, it's a diverse, intentionally diverse church. It's a place that looks out for the community. It's a place that does very intentional things in North Memphis with this church plant in North Memphis. And it gives me a perspective on a church as an activist entity to make a community better. And so I'm looking for stories like that about churches here, not just about Hope, of course. I don't want to be a homer and just do them about Hope, but I want to do them about a whole range of churches in the city, in the suburbs, all over. And I think that really informs my judgment and how I view things through the prism of religion.
I love that. And one of the things I want to lean into with our conversation, and you just kind of jumped there a little bit with diversity and intentionality, lessons you have learned along the way, things, I mean, you have you've been a lot of different places.
Yes.
I mean, you said Cleveland, Boston, Missouri. I'm testing my memory right now. Yeah, Orlando. Yeah. I mean, you have had lots of change, and but one of the things you and I were talking about is how intentional you have been throughout the change. I would love for you to share some lessons and what that looks like for you.
Sure. I'll tell you a little bit of background on me and also share some lessons.
Yeah.
So I've been in all those places, and it's a variety of cities, and I don't go to those places and succeed, and I guess the measure of success is measured differently by some, but I don't go to those places and succeed without a lot of help and with a lot of support. And I like to say to people that the support base you have in a community is a function of what you do to build a network and build a support base. So every time I go to a new community, I try and build a very diverse support base by intention. I try and go and meet a lot of people in the community, and not just the folks that are the bold-faced names that are head of group, head of this group, head of that group. I try and also meet folks in the community to get to know the city from sort of the grassroots level, as well as folks who run organizations. And sometimes people running organizations, it's harder to get to them anyway. It's easier to get to the folks who are running smaller organizations and who are more accessible. And I think through those associations and those meetings and building those relationships and building the rapport, you start to understand the community better. And I've understood throughout my career that to the extent that I'm very careful and appropriate about building a diverse coalition of people to surround myself with, I understand the city better. If I have only people that look like me telling me what a city's about, I am not going to understand the city completely. If I have a group of people that don't look like me, I won't understand the community. I have to have a mix of people, a lot of women at the table, a lot of men at the table. That's usually not hard to find in any city, by the way. And you have to really be very intentional about finding people that are East Asian descent, people who are Latino, folks who are Indian American. Just it's a very intentional thing. Sometimes it's hard to do. It's not easy to do it in most places. It was easier to do that in Orlando, frankly, than it was in Memphis. Because Orlando is a magnet that attracts people from all over the world because of Disney. Here, it's a little more of a black-white situation here. So and many Hispanics are starting to grow here. So you've got to be much more intentional about building that coalition. And I call it a coalition on purpose. It's really a group of people you can call on as your personal board of directors when you're new to a city. Because as I said before, when I first got here in 2013, I knew not a soul. Well, I knew a few people, but not many. And I literally had to, from the ground up, build a personal board of directors and a support base to understand the city. But I had to do it very quickly because I'm the managing editor of a newsroom when people were looking to me for both advice and for decision making. And the truth was that when I first got here, I didn't know much about the city. So I'm doing a lot of meetings with a diverse group of people to understand the city better. And I'm still trying to understand. I'm not there yet. I'm still trying to understand. I never will be there completely.
Yeah, and one of the things, when you were talking about that, it made me even think, going back to commercial appeal, one of the things that you can tell that you do that with, you're so intentional about even having a reporter in all different areas of this city. I feel like that's been really intentional, sharing stories from North Memphis, sharing stories from Germantown, sharing stories from Carville. It's everywhere. It's not just two little
frankly,
silos.
Wish it was everywhere. I mean, we're a smaller staff than we were even 7-8 years ago when I first got here, and certainly 10-15 years ago, much bigger staff. So we've got to pick our spots. So we've got folks based in sort of covering Germantown, Collierville. We got folks covering Whitehaven, other parts of Midtown and Memphis. We don't have the size staff to be in every community, but what we do have is the intentionality of making conscious decisions about what we go about and what we cover, what choices we make. And so when I'm out and about in the community and reporters are out way more than I am, we're meeting people, talking to folks, and making those decisions about what we want to highlight and cover, which in turn, I hope, gives people the impression that we're trying to be very inclusive in our coverage.
I really appreciate that. And I just love your perspective on just being so intentional with diversity and being so intentional about doing that. I would love for you to share just practical ways. I always like to lean into the really application type pieces. Those people listening to this, I think you have some incredible lessons on navigating change. You've navigated quite a bit of change. And incredible lessons on being intentional with diversity. One of the things you told me about is before you ask people over to dinner, you're thinking through the lens of who's coming, and are they all looking the same, or they? I would love for you to share that.
Yeah, so it's interesting you mentioned that part about dinner, because we haven't, of course, had one of those dinners in more than a year because of coronavirus, and we're still in the midst of that now. It's slowly starting to turn the corner, of course. And I look forward to the day where we can do dinners again.
Yes.
But my wife and I, Christina, we're very intentional about this on the personal level. When we have a dinner party or we have any kind of event, it's a United Nations of people that are in the room.
Good.
We do that on purpose because we want to learn from other people. And you don't learn when you're around people who only went to the same school you went to or in your same sorority or fraternity or who look like you. You're not going to learn as much as when you have a group that will challenge you, will have a different perspective from you, come from a different country from you. I think those are the events that I remember that I've left the most encouraged by, and I've left those kind of events, and I've learned more about myself and about the city I'm in when I have a group like that. So I've tried to be very intentional about doing that.
And what about embracing change?
Yeah, I think embracing change is a given these days, no matter what field you're in, but especially in journalism these days, it is a given. And I think that more and more, when you're in a field like this, you have to expect change, and you have to lean into change, because if you don't, you're going to get just bulldozed. I mean, literally, you're going to get bulldozed. People in my field especially, you have to be open to kind of upping your game and improving your game every single year, sometimes every other quarter. You have to take a new course and learn something new about social media strategy, learn something new about digital strategy. And I think that the folks who have really thrive in our business, and it really applies, I think, to any business. So those people that are open to change, open to improving, and open to being very aware of what you need to improve at. That's another part about this too. Let's see one quick example. When I got to Orlando as managing editor back in, I guess that would have been 2004 when I first got to Orlando, I didn't know a whole lot about the digital revolution that was starting to take place then. I had come from Cleveland where digital wasn't emphasized as much. And I recognized that about myself personally. So I went to the guy on staff who was the digital expert. And I said, look, I didn't give him a choice. I said, I'm going to take you out and I'll pay for 3 separate lunches. And at each of these 3 lunches, I want us together to work out a topic. And I want to come out of those 3 lunches knowing as much as I can of what you know about our digital operations. So I'm a better person at having conversations and commanding the staff. He looked at me like I had 3 heads. Because I literally was telling him I wanted him to create for him an executive level MBA course for me over 3 lunches. And he said, sure, I'll do it. What has he got? I wasn't really his boss, but I was a peer of his. And he said, sure, I'll do that. And it turned out to be a very good way to both learn the business and learn what he knew, but also cement a relationship and a friendship with him.
Wow.
Because over 3 meals, you learn a lot about a person. Apart from what you're there to learn, you learn about him personally, about his kids, about his upbringing. Sort of the same way you and I did when we had our conversation.
Yeah, and practical tips then. It sounds like one of them is taking people out to lunch, initiating conversations.
Yes. I think that it's sometimes underrated as a way to learn a city and learn about new people when you go to a new place. Take people out for a tour or have them give you a tour of the city. Have people take you out to coffee, which means breakfast in Memphis. Do those kind of things. And it sometimes can be difficult to do it during the pandemic, but figure out a way to do it. Maybe meet at Panera's and you sit 10 feet apart or 6 feet apart and have a conversation about the city. And go with no preconceptions about the city or the person. And I can't tell you how many times I've gotten to a city and had people whisper to me or sometimes shout to me, don't go to this area. Don't go to that place. I remember when I went to Boston back in the 1990s, 93, I was told immediately, don't go to South Boston. Don't visit South Boston. It's dangerous. It's a bad place. And of course, I was there one week and the first time I went to lunch, South Boston. Because someone had told me don't go, it made me want to go there more to see what they were describing. And I probably wouldn't want to spend all my time in South Boston, but I learned more about the city. And it was fascinating when I got back to the newsroom that day after going to lunch in South Boston. Where'd you go? South Boston. Really? And it made people view me differently because I was not kind of closed in about not going to places because of the preconceived notion about whether the place was hospitable toward African Americans. In that instance, South Boston had a reputation for not being hospitable. And I said, it's daytime. I'm going to lunch at a restaurant. What's the worst that can happen?
Yeah, that's really neat. That's really neat. Okay, so what would you like to leave people with today? I mean, any final thoughts from
Yeah, sure. I'd like to leave people with a final thought about the CA because I think in some ways the CA has been defined by others as a place that has kind of left its Memphis roots and no longer represents the city. And I want people to understand that no, that's not even close to the truth, that we're an organization where all of our people still reside in the city, love the city. They stopped at Starbucks this morning. They went to Kroger in the afternoon to get groceries. we understand the city, we care about the city, we grit and grind every single day to write the story of the city. And I want people to understand that the way to support us in that kind of reporting is to subscribe to the CA. And I think we'll earn your trust and we'll show value in what we do, but give us a chance. I want to leave people with that.
Give it a chance. I like that. And I just love, thank you so much for even sharing your wisdom and advice on just navigating how you've navigated your journey, on how you're encouraging us to be intentional with diversity and seeing the city. I mean, it gives us a really beautiful picture of what the city is by seeing it from so many different angles.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I appreciate what you do for the church as well and for the city. I know you and other ministers of the church, ministers at Hope, have a role outside of the church, and that's one of the reasons I joined Hope, is that it's such a great place to be part of, because you all do such tremendous work in the community.
Thank you for saying that. I appreciate that. Mark, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And that is a wrap for our Green Chair conversation with Mark Russell. Thank you so much for being here with us. Remember, today's conversation doesn't have to end here. I would love to connect with you. I would love to hear your thoughts about today's conversation, or even topics or people you want to hear from. So feel free to send me an email. Also, we would love for you to take a moment and encourage someone today by sharing this conversation with a friend. You can also watch any previous conversations at hopechurchmemphis.com/GCC or on YouTube, as well as listen on any podcast apps. Love you guys, and I'll see you next week.